Good day everyone. In this particular video, I'm going to discuss about the updations which has been done to the ISAP course from ISC². This update was happened in the month of August 2025. So everyone was pinging me with a lot of messages and everyone was asking me, Melvin, is still the old content is relevant for preparing for this exam? The answer is yes. Still, the old content is very much relevant. What they did previously in ISAP, it was 6 domains. They just compressed the 6 domains into 4 domains. And they removed this 2 domains from the previous syllabus. Architect for application security, security operations architecture. These 2 domains, they just removed it from the syllabus. But the content from these 2 domains has been compressed and added to these 4 domains. And also they have increased the weightage to these domains. So domain 1, which is governance, risk and compliance, is now 21% weightage. Security architecture modeling is now 22% weightage. Infrastructure and system security architecture is now 32% weightage. Identity and access management architecture is now 25% weightage. And also they have updated some of the content. A small updation has happened. I'm going to discuss that as well in this particular video. But you can always refer my previous course which you have already purchased in Udemy. That's more than sufficient. It covers 99.9% of all the topics and some new topics which has been added. I'm going to discuss with you as well in this particular video. So ISC² is providing something called as peace of mind offer. So what is peace of mind means? Suppose, for example, if you purchase the exam voucher for $600, with the $600, you can only take the exam one time. But suppose a participant fails or a candidate fails. If he again wants to retake the exam, he has to pay another $600. But if you pay extra $100 to $150, they will give you 2 shots free. So one time you can take the exam. If they fail, they can also take the second time free by just paying this $150 something extra. Check for the accurate amount in the ISC² website directly. That is peace of mind offer. So these are the following topics which has been added compared to the previous syllabus. But most of the topics which has been jotted down here, that topics I have already discussed in my course itself. Because the course which I have created in Udemy for ISAP, it not only actually covers the actual TOC, there are lots of extra information is being discussed there as well, right? Discussed there as well. So that is more than enough, but I'm going to give you small refresh of that new topics here as well in this particular video for sure. So under the governance, risk and compliance domain, one, they have added this small topic which is incorporate risk assessment artifacts and resilience solutions. This I have already discussed under risk management and BCP DRP in my course itself. Then in domain 2 security architecture modeling, they have discussed about Stride, SABSA and TOGAF. I have already discussed about SABSA and Stride in the course itself. TOGAF, you just have to have a high level idea. That is it. Then in the domain 3, infrastructure and system security architecture, they're going to talk about SCADA, which I have already discussed in the course videos itself. Air gap systems, EDR. We're going to discuss what is EDR as well. And in the identity and access management architecture, they have added as in identifiers, deep provisioning and provisioning, which I already have discussed in my course videos. But in this video, I'm just going to give you a small recap about all the new topics which has been added in the new syllabus. So most of the things has been already discussed in my course videos, but small refresher in this particular video for the new topics. First thing is SAPSA. So first of all, what is SAPSA? SAPSA is a framework. It's a framework. It stands for Sherwood Applied Business Security Architecture. It is actually a business focused. It is actually a business focused risk-based security architecture framework. So in an organization, if I want to come up with a security architecture focused towards business and risk-based one, I can go for SAPSA. First of all, what is an architecture? What is an architecture? Architecture, it's all about I have piece 1, piece 2, piece 3, piece 4. How I'm gonna connect all these pieces together to form something which might solve some sort of business problem. That's an architecture, right? How the components connect with each other, how the data has been shared, how secure that architecture is. That's the security architecture's viewpoint. For example, this is my laptop. If I just unscrew the back panel of the laptop, you can see a hardware, CPU, and memory cards, right? Sorry, memory. And then you have hard disk mounted on that. All these things are connected. All these components are connected with each other to form this laptop. But from security viewpoint, how securely the data transfer happens within the laptop, how the data transfer taken securely within a network. That's security architect viewpoints. You want to build a house. You will not go randomly build some house like this now. What you will do, you will first design the house logically. This is how the sit out will look like. And here I have to have a parking. Here I have to have a living room. The door should be here. This wall should be here. This window should be here. Like different rooms, how they connect with each other to satisfy your need. That's architecture. So security architecture is all about focusing from security viewpoint. Okay, you're going to build the house like this, but is the house is strong enough to withstand the natural disasters, common natural disasters? Will this house will be withstanding for more than 20 years? So how we should lay the strong foundations? Do we have the expansion for building later the top floors? Is it possible? Yes. So that is what security architecture viewpoint. So the security architecture always try to secure and protect the PPT, people, process, and technology. By protecting properly, we will achieve confidentiality, integrity, and availability, which is what the three tenets or three principles of security. So for an organization, if I want to develop a security architecture or design a security architecture, I can adapt a framework called as SAPSA. Framework is what? Is a set of best principles, guiding principles, best practices. That's a framework. The SAPSA framework is highly adaptable and comprehensive tool which actually helps, which actually helps the organization to create a security architecture which is being customized and tailored to their needs. That is why we go for this SAPSA framework. So these are all some of the characteristics of SAPSA. These are all some of the characteristics of SAPSA. It is risk-driven approach. It's a risk-driven approach. It is a layered approach. It's a layered approach. It is business centric. It focuses on the business needs, business goals, and objectives. So it's a business centric. It focuses on stakeholders, the needs and requirements of the stakeholders. It's a kind of a life cycle model. Life cycle model. It is service oriented, and it's a kind of a framework so we can integrate other standards and frameworks here. Also, it gives us the opportunity for capturing the right metrics and checking whether we are getting the right metrics or not. All these are some of the characteristics of SAPSA. So the SAPSA is actually based on some layers. The first layer is business attribute layer. Business attribute layer. This is also called as a contextual attribute as well. So when we say business attribute, here we are trying to understand the business goals, the business objectives, and what is the need of the business. For example, there is a bank. For the bank, what is the business goal, objectives, risk, and trust requirements they have? We will see that. For example, for that bank, they need some sort of mobile banking. Okay, mobile banking. Also, they have to make sure they are comply with all the regulations, and also they have to make sure customers trusting this particular bank app as well. That's a kind of a business attributes from business perspective. What does the business need? What they're looking for? Then contextual attributes. This contextual attributes, we're gonna talk about same thing like business attributes. We're gonna talk about, okay, there is a mobile need, you need a mobile banking app, but that mobile banking app should also satisfy, comply with all the regulations and stakeholder interest. Then we go into the conceptual attributes. Conceptual. What security concepts? What security concepts will satisfy the business need? So here we're gonna talk about the security policies, the requirements, high level models. We're gonna define the security domains, all these things. For example, if it is a mobile app, we will come up with how to define confidentiality, how to define authentication, how to define authorization, how we can achieve non-repudiation, everything. Then logical attribute, this is what we understand what are the security need from the conceptual attributes. We will organize the controls logically here. Like here, we will actually come up with creating the access rules, right? We have to authenticate via MFA. Like this, we will come up with the logically all the controls. Then physical attributes, it's all about how these tools, like the systems, applications, and the infrastructure in which we can enforce these access rules, enforce this MFA. So it's all more from a deployment point of view. Then secure component architecture is, it's all about managing and maintaining and operating that physical layer, right? The technology components and tools. This is what actually the layers of SAPSA, the layers of SAPSA. So now we will take a practical case study. Suppose there is an organization called as XYZ. This organization decides that they're going to adopt the cloud. They're going to adapt the cloud, and they're going to move certain application to the cloud. It might be a healthcare application, and this organization is doing business in US. So they are from healthcare sector, so they have to comply with one regulation called as HIPAA. So now the company has decided to migrate to the cloud, move this particular healthcare application to the cloud for digital transformation. Now, I'm going to adapt SAPSA framework for this scenario to support the organization in migrating the applications to the cloud for digital transformation. Actually, SAPSA is an iterative framework. Iterative means we will implement it, take the feedback, and then we will again redefine it, and then we will refine it like that. So we will actually start with business requirements. Then the end will be operational, security, and monitoring. And it's a continuous feedback loop. Based on that, we redefine and we refine the process and everything. So we will check that now. First thing is business attributes. So we have to first understand the organization goal. Why the organization want to migrate to the cloud? What is the objective they're trying to achieve? What is the business drivers? In this case, it is something like reducing the infrastructure cost, saving the cost, and also for scalability, and also for digital transformation. So from this understanding, we will create the action plan and documentation. Like, what is the business objectives? Why they are migrating to the cloud? To reduce the infrastructure cost and enhance the scalability through cloud adoption. The business strategy for this objective is, first I'll try to migrate non-critical application first to the cloud. To make sure it's going through smoothly and it's safe and secure, then we will migrate the critical application to the cloud. This is my strategy. Then from contextual viewpoint, I have to consider the regulatory requirements as they are doing the business in US and EU. In US, they have to comply with HIPAA. In EU, they have to comply with GDPR. So I have to understand what is HIPAA, what is GDPR, what are the requirements comes under that. Based on that, I have to create the action plan. So regulatory compliance analysis, analyze GDPR, HIPAA, and any other industry specific regulation which I have to comply with. And then I also do the stakeholder analysis to engage them, this engage with the legal and compliance team to address this regulatory concerns. Give me a thought process how we can address that. Then conceptual attributes document. This is not actually contextual, it is wrong, it is conceptual. Okay. So here we know that the PHI data, personal health information, has to be properly secured against the attacks against CIA. Also, we have to consider the privacy as well. So here I define high-level security policies for cloud adoption, like policies related to data protections, access control policies, data encryption policies. The action plan here is, I will just do the business requirements mapping. Whatever the business goals for that application, I will translate the regulatory requirement, business requirements into the security requirements. And then I will create the high level security policies. I will also do the risk assessment. When we move this app and when we move the associated PHA data to the cloud, what is the risk we have? So I'm going to do that as well. Then the logical attributes. Here we will create the logical controls. Like we're going to define role-based access controls. We're going to define identity and access management controls, encryption, data classification, all these things. So action plan is, we will take the business process, we will define the high level business process, and then we will understand how we can manage the accounts, fund transfer should happen, balance inquiries and everything. And we'll focus on security service design and compliance requirements related things we will implement in the form of controls. That's logical attributes. So once I have the visibility about the logical controls, what is needed, we have to map it with the physical. So I have to do something like evaluate the CSP, their security capabilities, evaluate the provider by checking their compliance, by checking their audit reports and everything, and how to implement the controls which we defined in the logical attributes document. Then how we perform the data classification, technical solutions, implementation plan, all these things are action plan under the physical attributes document. Then the last one is component attributes document. It is more kind of detailed configurations for all the tools, all the controls, so that they will implement it, they will operate it. Once they went into operations, we will do the log monitoring, access recertifications, incident response drill. We will get the feedback. Again, we will redefine. Again, we will refine. This is a kind of ending loop to make that security architecture very mature. That is SAPSA for you. The layers which I discussed. Then we have one more thing which is called as TOGAF. TOGAF. Okay, TOGAF. Just have a high level visibility about these things, not go deep dive into that. TOGAF. The TOGAF stands for the Open Group Architecture Framework. So the TOGAF is a enterprise architecture framework. It is a enterprise architecture framework. It is actually used to design, plan, and implement and govern an organization's IT architecture, which will be aligned with business goals. Business goals. It is not a security architecture like SAPSA, but it is actually a IT architecture which aligns with the business goals. There are some phases involved in TOGAF, but that is not needed for your ISAP exam. So just know what is TOGAF. TOGAF is an IT architecture. It's a it's a IT architecture framework based on mapping with the business goals. So next one, domain 2, security architecture and modeling. In that, they have added threat modeling. I already discussed about threat modeling in my course videos, so you can check that. But again, a small refresher of threat modeling. What is threat modeling? So threat modeling is all about a scenario-based analysis of threats. Scenario-based analysis of threats. This threat modeling we can do in two ways. One is proactive and other one is reactive. When we are developing a product, when we are designing a product, during the design phase, if I introduce threat modeling, it is proactive. By introducing the threat modeling in the design phase, we can drive the secure design of the application. Secure design of the application. Once after the product has been developed and once it is in operation or production, if I want to add some new features or if I want to do the threat modeling, that is reactive. So ultimately in threat modeling, we are trying to identify the threats. We are trying to prioritize the threats based on the impact and the severity. And we are trying to fix the vulnerabilities to reduce the threat. That's why we go for threat modeling. But how to drive the threat modeling? There are many threat models. One of the most important thing is STRIDE. The STRIDE is a Microsoft threat model launched long time back. But nowadays in organizations, we don't practically use STRIDE a lot because it's a very rigid static threat model. It only focuses on the 6 threats. So STRIDE stands for S stands for spoofing, T stands for tampering, R stands for repudiation, I stands for information disclosure, D stands for denial of service, E stands for elevation of privilege. What is spoofing? Anything which has an identity can be spoofed. I can take your IP address, I can spoof I can take your MAC address, I can spoof. I can take your user ID, I can spoof. Spoofing is all about impersonation. Actually, which is the impact of the security attribute called as authentication. Authentication. Then we have tampering. For example, we have a system A here, system B. The system A is transmitting some data to system B. Transmitting some data to system B. As they are using some vulnerable protocol like HTTP, FTP, everything will be sent in the clear text. Everything will be sent in the clear text. So now there is an actor called as Bob who is having access to this channel. Now once he have access to the channel, he can able to sniff and he can able to see everything in the clear text. So that leads to what? Information disclosure, which is the impact to confidentiality. Because Bob is not an authorized user to view that data, but he is viewing, accessing. That's the impact to confidentiality. As the data is sent in the clear text, now Bob is going to modify, alter, and tamper the data. That is tampering, which is the impact to integrity. Now, what is repudiation? A subject is committing some action but denying the action which they did. That's repudiation. For example, there is a server. In this server, we have file 1, file 2, file 3. So Bob logs into the server, deletes file 1, file 2, file 3. But is denying his activity saying I didn't do that. Because in this server, they have not enabled any logs. So Bob is repudiating for the actions which he has done. But now if I have enabled the logs, all the actions which is done by Bob will be captured in the form of logs. Now I can review the logs and I can trace it back what Bob has did. So now he cannot repudiate for his action. So repudiation is impacting the security attribute, non-repudiation. Then DOS attack. So I'm doing some sort of attacks against the server by which I'm trying to consume the resources and bandwidth of the server so that legitimate users might not be able to access it. So we are denying the availability of the service to the customers. It's an impact to availability. Elevation of privilege. There is an application. I just logged in as a normal user. But by exploiting some vulnerabilities in this particular application, I escalated my privileges from user to admin. This is actually called as privilege escalation or elevation of privilege, which is the impact to authorization. If you have a proper authentication, spoofing is not possible. If you have a proper controls to achieve integrity, tampering is not possible. If you have proper controls to achieve non-repudiation, repudiation is not possible. If you have proper controls to achieve confidentiality, information disclosure will not happen. If you have redundant architecture and resilient architecture, then it will not have impact to availability. Then if you have proper secure applications, then elevation of privilege might not be possible. Same thing here. Spoofing impacts authentication, tampering impacts integrity, repudiation impact non-repudiation, information disclosure impact the security attribute confidentiality, DOS impact the security attribute availability, elevation of privilege impact the authorization attribute. So when you talk about stride or any threat model like pasta anything, we will first define the scope and apply the threat model to each component, document the threats, and we design the mitigation. These are the 4 steps we follow in performing the threat modeling. Then domain 1, we have risk management. Actually, I have already discussed about risk management in the course videos itself, but again a small recap. So what is the ultimate goal and objective of having a proper risk management? The ultimate goal and objective of having a proper risk management is to identify the risk and see whether the risk is acceptable or not. If not, we will try to implement the controls to reduce the risk so that we will drive the business. That is the ultimate goal of having risk management. So we're going to talk about some of the concepts in risk management. First thing is asset, vulnerability, threat, threat agent, risk, exposure, countermeasure, or safeguard. Let's go to the whiteboard for this. So I have a server here. I have a server. In this particular server, I have not given any password, no password. So the server is first of all an asset. Anything which is creating, generating, adding value to the organization is an asset. In this server, I have not configured any password. Password is what? It's a control. Absence of a control is what? A vulnerability. Vulnerability is all about weakness or a loophole or a misconfiguration or a design error is called as a vulnerability. So no password is an absence of a control, which is a vulnerability. In this particular server, I store some sensitive data as well. Now there is a person called as Bob. Bob comes to know that this particular server is not protected with any password. Not protected with any password. So what Bob did, he tries to access that particular server without password. So in this scenario, Bob is a threat actor. And the event or the action by which Bob is trying to exploit that vulnerability is called as threat. An event or action which takes advantage of the vulnerability is a threat. The moment at which Bob logs into that system by exploiting that vulnerability, that is called as exploit. The moment of compromise, the instance of compromise. But where comes the risk here? Risk is not a confirmed incident. Risk is something like if this happens, what is the impact? That's risk. So threat into vulnerability, likelihood into impact. So likelihood of a threat exploiting that vulnerability, which results in the impact is called as risk. Likelihood of a threat exploiting that vulnerability, which results in the impact is called as risk. What is the likelihood or probability of Bob exploiting this vulnerability to log into that system? And if he steals the sensitive data, what is the impact? That is risk. Also, whenever we talk about risk management, they used to always say inherent risk, inherent risk, and residual risk, residual risk. Inherent risk means whatever the risk we have before implementing the controls, before implementing the controls, that is inherent risk. Whatever the risk we have after implementing the controls, which we accept, that is residual risk. Always remember, there is nothing called as 100% risk-free environment. No. Always there is some risk which we are trying to accept. That acceptable risk after implementing the controls is called as residual risk. It's called as residual risk. These are the terminologies we should know under risk management. Exposure is nothing. If I have that system with no password, within a secure internal network, the exposure is less. But if I put this particular system in a demilitarized zone and expose it to the internet, the exposure is high. So a lot of attacks can happen. That is exposure. Whatever the controls we have, that can be categorized into safeguard or countermeasure, either to prevent or react for the particular attack. Same thing here they have given in this slide. So for example, there is a person called as Kevin. Kevin. So Kevin was studying about information risk management process. So he made some notes on the definition related to that. If you see asset, he just jotted down the servers and system of the company is an asset. True. Then vulnerability is they have a weak rule in a firewall. That is a vulnerability, weakness. Threat is hackers can hack into the network or servers by bypassing the firewall. Threat agent might be hackers. What will be the risk if it happens? Loss of critical organization data. Exposure is what? They have 100% data, for example. In that 25% they have not encrypted. So if hackers have access to unencrypted data, that 25% loss will happen. That's the exposure, the percentage of loss. This is actually called as exposure factor. Exposure is different and exposure factor is different. So what will the risk management process achieve? It helps to maintain the identified risk at an acceptable level. Whether is it acceptable? No, 25% loss of data is not acceptable. Then I'm gonna implement the controls like this, like something like encrypting the data. But what is the cost of doing that? Will it make any justifications? All these things they will do under risk management. So these are the activities we do in the risk management life cycle. First one is risk identification. So in risk identification, first we will identify the assets, what all we have. Then we will identify the value of the assets. Then we will identify what are the critical assets we have. Then we will identify what are the threats for the critical assets. Then we will identify what are the vulnerabilities we have for that. Once we have this information, then we will conduct something called as a risk assessment. Risk analysis, both are same. Then we do the risk response. Then we keep on monitoring the level of risk. If the risk deviates from the level accepted level, again we will take some treatment to treat that risk. Same thing, risk identification. It is all about brainstorming, nominal group technique, SWOT analysis, regular vulnerability assessment, discussion with the stakeholders, OEM updates, email, all these things we do to discover the assets, categorize and document the assets, as well as document the risk for that particular organization. You don't have to know about each of the techniques for this exam. These are all some extra I have created in the slide. You know what is risk assessment? It is just studying and evaluating the risk in order to evaluate the possibility and impact on the corporate goals. That's why we do the risk assessment or the risk analysis. So, why we do risk analysis? It actually prioritizes the risk and calculates the cost of safeguard. It provides a cost benefit comparison. It identifies and provides the risk factors with the greatest impact. It also integrates the security program objectives with the organization business objectives and requirements. These are the reasons or objectives by which we can achieve by conducting the risk analysis. So goal of risk analysis is to identify the organization asset and their value, then to identify the vulnerabilities and threats, to measure the probability and impact of the threats, then we come up with the controls considering the cost and everything into the picture. So who are all the stakeholders in a risk analysis team? CISO, information security officer, risk manager, network admins, business owner, system technical owner, executive sponsor. Most of the people will be a stakeholder or interested people in the risk analysis team. So the steps to perform risk analysis is to identify the asset and the value, then conduct the risk analysis and assessment, then the countermeasure selections and implementation of that. So the following things should be considered when assigning the values to the asset. So what is the cost to acquire or develop the assets, cost to maintain and protect the assets, the value of the asset to the owners and users, the value to the asset to the adversaries, value of the intellectual property in the asset, and price others willing to pay for the assets, cost to replace the asset if it is lost or damaged. Also, operational production activities that are affected if the asset is not available, liability issues, usefulness and role of the asset in the organization. All these factors has to be taken into considerations before defining the value for the asset. So there are two types of analysis. One is qualitative and other one is quantitative. Qualitative is subjective and quantitative is objective. In the name itself, you can see quantity and here quality. So in qualitative risk analysis, we don't bring any cost into the picture. If this happens, you're gonna lose the goodwill. If this happens, you're gonna lose the trust from the customers. That is qualitative. And in qualitative, it is all about subject matter expert opinion. The person who is going to drive the qualitative analysis should be a long-term employees. Because the employee who is working in an organization for a long time, they only know the in and out of the organization, so they can properly come up with the opinion. So in organization, in which scenarios they go for qualitative, if they don't have assessors who is having a good experience in quantitative, or if they don't have the proper information metrics value, then they'll go for qualitative. It is something like this. For example, you want to take the ISAP exam. You are saying that, Melvin, I just completed domain 1, still domain 2, domain 3, domain 4 is pending. Can I go for the exam? With all of my experience, immediately with the fraction of second, I would say no. There is a high likelihood that you can get the questions from domain 2, domain 3, domain 4, and if you don't answer it, it will create a high impact. High likelihood, high impact. I didn't include any sort of cost or metrics here, just high likelihood, high impact. That is qualitative. Quantitative means there is a cost, there are some formula, there are some metrics which we have into the picture. For example, if you see, these are the metrics and the formula. First one is asset value. So we will identify what is asset value. Okay, $5,000. Exposure factor is the percentage of loss which can happen. Suppose if there is a fire which caught up in the data center, it can damage 50% of the data center. So that is exposure factor. Single loss expectancy is if the fire catches up in the data center, what is the loss one time? That is SLA. The formula is asset value into exposure factor. This is a formula. Then annual rate of occurrence. How many times in a year the fire can caught up in a data center? That is ARO. Might be 3 times in a year. So the formula is frequency divided by years. Then ALE is annually how much loss I can expect for this particular threat of fire catching up in a data center. The formula is SLE into ARO. Whenever you take a judgment of going with a control, procuring a control, implementing a control, it's not based on the SLE, it is based on the ALE. And then we have to come up with the annual cost of safeguard, because every control comes with the cost, implementing cost, and then maintaining cost, operating cost, everything should be taken into considerations. If you see a small steps here, you can see. First we assign asset value, then we calculate the exposure factor, then we calculate the SLE, then we assess the ARO, then we derive the ALE, then we perform the cost benefit analysis of the countermeasure. Example, fire destroys a server with encrypted data. Asset value is $6,000. Exposure factor is 50%. So you know what is the SLE? It is asset value into exposure factor. So it is 6,000 into 50 by 100. So it comes around $3,000 for this threat. So annual rate of occurrence is 10% chance of fire in 1 year. 10% chance of fire in 1 year. So how to calculate the ALE? How to calculate the ALE? So ALE is all about the arrow, which is 10% into 3,000. So annually $300 loss. Is it acceptable? Okay. No, no, it's not acceptable means we have to purchase some fire extinguisher, fire detection system. What is the cost of it? If it comes around $1,000, then it is not a good control because the loss itself is $300 and the control cost is $1,000 means it's not good. It is not good. That is what cost benefit analysis. So qualitative and quantitative I have given here. In qualitative, these are some of the ways by which you can drive it: brainstorming, storyboarding, surveys, questionnaire, checklist, one-to-one meeting, interviews like that. Quantitative, which I discussed with you already. These are all some of the techniques. These are all some added up info from my side. It's not mandatory for you to know about all these things for ISAP exam. So what is the difference between quantitative and qualitative? Requires complex calculation. In quantitative, yes. In qualitative, no. Requires a high degree of guesswork. In quantitative, no. In qualitative, yes. Provides credible cost benefit analysis. In quantitative, yes. In qualitative, no. Provides opinion of the individuals who know the process. In quantitative, no. In qualitative, yes. Shows clear-cut losses that can be accrued within a year. Quantitative, yes, but qualitative, no. There's a difference between quantitative versus qualitative. But in the organization, they will not go for qualitative or quantitative separately. They'll go for hybrid risk analysis, where they will combine both quantitative and qualitative. Both quantitative and qualitative. That's what hybrid risk analysis. So once we do the risk analysis, we have to respond back to the risk. Respond back to the risk. That is risk response. That is something like how you're gonna treat that risk. So before going for any sort of risk response, we have to consider all this factor. Evaluating the countermeasures, safeguard and security control using cost benefit analysis. Providing a proposal of response options and report with the senior management. Always you have to check with the senior management, get the approval. Then adjust the findings based on conditions, concern, priorities, and resource. These are the things or the factors which you have to consider while going for any risk response. Okay. So these are the different types of ways by which you can able to treat the risk. Okay. First one is risk reduction or mitigation. Risk reduction or mitigation. What does this means? We are trying to implement the controls to reduce the risk to the acceptable level. That is risk mitigation or risk reduction. Then risk transfer is one classic example of risk transfer is taking a insurance. And in the cyber security world, it's all about taking the cyber insurance. So by taking a cyber insurance, we are just transferring the financial risk to a third party. We cannot always outsource all the risk to a third party. It's not possible. The loss of goodwill, loss of customer trust, you cannot transfer it, but financial risk you can transfer. That is one example of risk transfer. Risk acceptance is risk is not always a negative thing. It is always there is a reward as well. So to grab that particular reward, you're gonna accept the risk as it is. That is risk acceptance. Risk avoidance is a proactive approach. It's a proactive approach. So you're going to avoid the situation which can give rise to the risk. That's risk avoidance. These are the four ways we can treat the risk. After implementing the controls to reduce the risk, still we will have some risk which is accepted. That is called as residual risk, which actually remains after implementing the controls, which is accepted by the organization. Always remember, risk is never eliminated, always residual risk remains. Reducing one risk will can introduce another risk as well. Residual risk should be equal to the organization risk tolerance or acceptable level. There's a small kind of a map which I did. If risk is less than the acceptable level, accept it, yes. No means go for mitigation, but what is the mitigation cost? Mitigation cost should be less than the asset value. That means you can mitigate the risk. If it is greater than the asset value, then accept the risk. So before selecting the countermeasure, you have to always do the cost benefit analysis. Early before implementing the safeguard, early after implementing the safeguard, and the annual cost of safeguard. If you see here, total cost of ownership is the total cost of a control. Return on investment is the amount of money saved by implementing a safeguard. Uncertainty is degree to which you can lack confidence in an estimate expressed as a percentage from 0% to 100%. It's all about uncertainty. One example I have given here. So AL is $10,000. After implementing the control, it is $2,000. So annual cost of that particular control is $500. So 10,000 minus 2,000 minus 500, 7,500. This is a value of the safeguard to the company. Always we have to monitor the risk and assess the level of risk so that we can keep on taking some actions to reduce the risk to the acceptable level. And once we do all these activities, we have to report the risk to the particular relevant team. That's risk reporting. So continuous improvement. We have a risk management process, but or as an organization, you have to keep on improvising the risk management process. So for that, you can adapt something called as a risk maturity model by which you can keep on improvising and refining that risk management process. So if you have a very mature risk management program, it is very good in preventing, detecting and responding to security incident. And all this maturity and growth comes from the experience and learning from the past. So in terms of risk, we have to also capture certain metrics like KPIs and KRIs. This I have already discussed deep dive in my course. Please check that particular sections. So ICS, Industrial Controller System. They used to call like this ICS and SCADA. This ICS and SCADA, ICS stands for Industrial Controller System. SCADA stands for Supervisory Computer Acquisition and Data Acquisition System, or Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition Systems. ICS and SCADA is used everywhere. For example, in petroleum sectors, refining sectors, oil refinings, dam controller systems, electric grid controller systems, all these are some examples of ICS. One such example I can give you is this one. So here I have water refinery systems. So this is connected to PLCs. This is connected to DCS, where we have the HMI interface. This is where we have SCADA. Here we will maintain something called as data historian. It's a demilitarized zone, which is connected to the internet. Now this is a sample ICS architecture. This is a sample ICS architecture. So we have this water refinery systems. These water refinery systems can be controlled, can be controlled okay. These water refinery systems can be configured using the relevant PLCs, programmable logic controllers. And also at the DCS, distributed controller system level, we will have the human machine interface. From here, you can also able to centrally configure and control these PLCs and the water refinery systems. Whatever is happening here, I want to get the visibility. So here we have a monitoring solution called as SCADA. The SCADA monitors collect all the info and store it in a database which is called as data historian. This network is called as OT network. This network is called as IT network. The problem with this architecture is there is no proper isolation between the IT and the OT network. Attack can initiate here and it can spread through the OT network. So there should be proper firewall you should bring between the IT and the OT network. This is one of the basic security principles in ICS and SCADA. Already I have discussed about ICS and SCADA in my course. You can check that. But this is small refreshment. So examples of ICS in electric generation distribution they use it. Petroleum refining process distribution they use it. Chemical processing, mining operations, pharmaceutical industry, all these places where we use ICS. SCADA is used for monitoring and data collection purpose. This is a sample architecture of ICS. You can see this as well. We have a corporate network. I bring in a firewall. Then there's a kind of a switch where I connect the HMI systems by which we can configure and apply the configurations. Engineering workstations, historian is nothing but a database where we will store the information about what's happening here. This is a PLC which is going to configure and control the consecutive devices. So what is a problem with this particular ICS and SCADA systems? Or it's all highly distributed. It's been scattered around the world, right? Around the location, different locations, geographically separated. Right, centrally it's not possible to acquire and control is not possible. It's very critical. Field devices control local operations as well. This has been placed in different locations. For example, dam controllers. The dam controller unit sensors might be located in different locations where the dam is built. Right, the field devices. So physical security also is one of the most important consideration here. Again, it's a simple sample picture which I discussed. So what are the challenges we have in securing SCADA? First thing is, these are all ultimately a very complex systems. So in these systems, they don't have proper patch management. They don't reboot that system. There is no proper authentication. That's one of the problem. Then most of the devices in ICS has been legacy hardware and software device. And the protocol which is used in ICS and SCADA systems are proprietary protocols, which is also vulnerable, like Modbus over TCP, Profinet and all. So multiple and diverse access point, they have different kinds of architecture in way how they communicate. That might be also kind of vulnerables. Also, these devices might have to be accessed remotely as well to do the configurations and monitoring everything. So it should be connected to the business network. All these are challenges which we have in SCADA. So different protocols, every vendor is having different protocols. There are 200 different serial protocols, which is actually used in ICS and SCADA. All these protocols are most probably vulnerable. That is why now we have one standard protocol. It's called as Open Platform Communication Protocol, which is a standard protocol now, and it's supported by many vendors. It's advisable to use this protocol. Even if you are using any vulnerable protocols, try to secure it with IPsec. This is one of the suggestions. In the ICS and SCADA sectors, rather than protecting the data, normally in IT systems, traditional IT systems, we will try to protect the data. But here we will try to protect the process. That is why in ICS sectors, when we ask them to draw the CAA triad, they'll not draw like this. They will draw like this. They give the first focus to availability, then integrity, then confidentiality. So most of the attacks against ICS will impact the availability and the integrity. That is why if you take the history of attacks which has happened against ICS sectors, all the attacks will impact the availability, the loss of control of systems to the authorized users. Then they will not do the proper patching and upgrading. But the suggestion is you have to always do the hardening. You have to always update and patch with the latest patches and firmwares. So access to components. So these ICS and SCADA systems has been scattered in different locations. So the security engineer, if you want to properly secure that particular devices, first they have to have the direct physical access to that components, and that area where they lay this field devices and everything, that should be first of all have proper physical security controls. That's very important, physical security, very important here. Then, as I told you, in ICS we don't say CA trade, we say AAC trade. We give the high focus to availability, then integrity, then confidentiality. So always we can have certain type of firewalls to segregate the IT and the OT network. Proper segregation is very important. That is what I have given here the point, right? And even some sectors, right, very critical ICS sectors, you can go for something called as air gap systems. What does air gap means? Not having a firewall to logically segment the network, but having some sort of physical segregation. These are critical ICS components, means I am going to physically isolate and segment this area. That is air gap systems. Same thing, you have to enable proper secure authentications before giving the access to the ICS network. So physical security to the area is also very important. Having proper biometric authentication, smart cards, access cards as well. Also control the proper level of access by using proper authorization access control models. Always monitor and capture all the activities for proper visibility to see what's happening and what has happened. So always have firewalls to logically separate the networks. That's what network segregations. And a small example as well I have given here. So we have a internet, gateway router, firewall. Here I have a data storage. This is a IT network. And then there is a router firewall to segregate the IT and the OT network. Here I have PLCs, HMIs, and control servers and the field devices as well. So always rather than focusing more towards protection, also you have to go give equal focus to the deduction. Monitoring is very important. Before saying thank you, I just wanted to discuss one more small topic, which is called as in IIM, joiners, movers, and learners. It's not learners actually, it's leavers. Okay, it's a typo mistake, writing mistake. It's leavers. This actually comes under identity and access management. This is nothing but onboarding and offboarding, which actually I discussed in my course as well. Uh, it's all about, we call this as JML process. JML process. It is nothing but a lifecycle management framework in IAM which we use to ensure that the users get the right level of access at the right time to perform the task. What is joiners? Suppose if a candidate joined as an employee to the organization, that's joiners. So at that time we have to provision a new digital identity. We have to give the proper access rights, right? And most of the things we can automate as well here. That is joiners. Like for example, Melvin joins as a financial analyst. So IAM provisions a corporate email ID for him, access to the financial systems ERP and accounting tool, and they will not provide me access to any other systems. Then movers. So once I join the organization, I might be moving internally, getting a promotion, transfer, a role change. At that time, they have to update the roles and the permissions. And they have to remove the old access and everything. And they grant me the new ones. And they have to also prevent privilege creep. Privilege creep. It should not happen. Because I should not keep on accumulating a lot of access, which can lead to privilege creep. And they have to review the process as well. Then leaver is when the employee left the organization, we have to deprovision his account. Deprovision his account, revoke all access immediately. Then we have to do proper data handling. What is data handling? So we have to archive the mailbox, transfer the ownership of files, handle the legal HR complaints related things, all these things we do. This is actually called as a JML lifecycle. It's very critical for security, compliance, efficiency, and auditability. This is a newly added terminology which is added in IAM. The same thing I discussed in the course as onboarding and offboarding. So this is a small info which I wanted to share it with you. I hope this new update information is beneficial to you. Happy learning and congratulate everyone for enrolling for my course. And I also say thank you team and thank you all and wishing you the best success in clearing the CSSP ISAP exam. Thank you so much.